Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Zane. The night my wife laughed in my face when I tried to be intimate with her was the night our marriage ended, though it would take me several more months to file the divorce papers that made it official. Her cruel laughter after I had spent hours preparing a romantic evening wasn't just rejection. It was mockery, humiliation, and the final confirmation that whatever love and respect had once existed between us was irretrievably gone. Looking back now, I can see that our marriage had been deteriorating slowly for years. But like most people living inside a failing relationship, I had been making excuses and hoping for improvements rather than facing the reality of what we had become. Elena and I had been married for 6 years when that devastating evening occurred. 6 years that had begun with genuine love and optimism, but had gradually evolved into something that resembled more of a business arrangement than a romantic partnership. The early years of our marriage had felt normal and promising in all the ways that young couples expect. Elena and I had met through mutual friends during our late 20s, both of us established in our careers and ready to build something meaningful with someone who shared our values and goals. Elena worked for a small agency downtown, while I provided the stability and income that allowed us to lease a house and plan for the future we both said we wanted. During our dating period and first few years of marriage, Elena and I had maintained both physical and emotional intimacy that made me believe we were well-matched partners who could navigate the normal challenges that long-term relationships face. We were affectionate with each other, enjoyed spending time together, and seemed to share similar ideas about what marriage should look like in terms of mutual support, shared responsibilities, and building a life together. But somewhere around our 4th year of marriage, I began to notice subtle changes in Elena's behavior that suggested she was becoming less invested in our relationship, though these changes were so gradual that I initially dismissed them as natural adjustments to married life rather than signs of deeper problems. Elena seemed less interested in spending quality time together, less responsive to my attempts at physical affection, and generally more distant, which created a sense of disconnection between us. The most noticeable change was in our physical relationship. Elena began declining my advances more frequently, always with reasonable explanations about being tired from work, having headaches, or simply not being in the mood for physical intimacy. At first, I accepted Elena's explanations without question, understanding that work stress and the routine demands of daily life can affect anyone's interest in physical intimacy. I assumed Elena's job had become more demanding as she advanced and took on additional responsibilities. But as Elena's rejections became more frequent and her excuses more elaborate, I began to wonder whether something deeper was affecting our physical relationship. Elena would claim to have headaches that lasted for days, describe work stress that made her too anxious to relax, or simply state that she wasn't in the mood without offering any explanation or timeline for when she might feel differently. What made Elena's constant rejections particularly difficult to accept was the contrast between her apparent lack of energy for our relationship and her obvious enthusiasm for other activities and social commitments. Elena would spend hours getting ready to go out with friends, invest significant time and effort in her appearance for work events, and maintain an active social media presence that suggested she had plenty of energy for things that mattered to her. But at home with me, Elena seemed to operate in a completely different mode, comfortable but uninterested, present but not engaged, going through the motions of married life without any apparent joy or enthusiasm for our shared experiences. She would change immediately into sweatpants and old t-shirts when she came home from work, abandon any effort to be attractive or appealing, and settle into evening routines that required minimal interaction or engagement with me. Elena's phone usage also became a source of growing concern and suspicion, though I tried to suppress my instincts about what her changed behavior might indicate. She began spending increasing amounts of time scrolling through social media, responding to text messages, and engaging in what appeared to be lengthy conversations with people whose identities she never shared with me. When I would ask Elena what was keeping her up or who she was communicating with, she would give vague responses. I resisted jumping to conclusions about infidelity, partly because I didn't want to become the kind of suspicious, controlling husband that I had always despised, and partly because I hoped that whatever was causing Elena's distance would resolve itself without requiring confrontation or interventions. Instead of addressing my concerns directly, I decided to try to revitalize our relationship by putting more effort into romance, quality time, and the kind of gestures that had brought us together in the first place. I planned special dates, surprised Elena with thoughtful gifts, and tried to create opportunities for us to reconnect and remember what we had enjoyed about each other during our early years together. But my increased efforts to improve our relationship seemed to have the opposite effect on Elena, who appeared to find my romantic gestures annoying rather than appealing. Elena would respond to my attempts at romance with polite appreciation that felt forced, as if she was going through the motions of being a grateful wife without feeling any genuine excitement about my efforts. Elena's lack of enthusiasm for my romantic initiatives made me feel increasingly desperate and pathetic, like I was begging for attention and affection from someone who had already decided that I wasn't worth her time or energy. The harder I tried to bridge the growing gap between us, the more obvious it became that Elena had mentally and emotionally checked out of our marriage, even if she wasn't ready to acknowledge that reality explicitly. The breaking point came one evening. I had spent considerable time planning what I hoped would be a romantic evening that might help us reconnect and rediscover some of the intimacy that had been missing from our relationship for months. I had arranged to leave work early so I could prepare Elena's favorite meal, setting up our dining room with candles, flowers, and the kind of atmospheric details that had once made her feel special and appreciated. I chose a wine that Elena particularly enjoyed, put together a playlist of music that had significance for our relationship, and invested several hours in creating the kind of romantic evening that I hoped would remind both of us why we had fallen in love and decided to build a life together. When Elena arrived home from work that evening, she seemed surprised to discover my preparations for our romantic dinner. She commented that the setup looked nice. During dinner, I tried to engage Elena in a conversation, asking about her thoughts and feelings about our relationship, expecting her to open up. But Elena's responses were polite and distant, as if she were participating in a social obligation rather than connecting with someone she loved and wanted to build a future with. After dinner, I suggested we move to the living room to continue our evening together, hoping that the combination of wine, music, and romantic atmosphere might create an opportunity for physical intimacy that had been absent from our relationship for far too long. I had been patient with Elena's rejections and excuses, but I was hoping that my obvious effort to create a special evening might inspire her to make an effort as well. But when I moved closer to Elena on the couch and began to touch her in places that had once led naturally to deeper intimacy, her reaction was swift and devastating. Instead of responding positively to my touch or even rejecting me gently, Elena looked directly at me and laughed in a way that was unmistakably mocking and dismissive. Elena's exact words were burned into my memory from the moment she spoke them. She told me she won't allow me to sleep with her in a tone and expression that made it clear that she found my desire for physical intimacy ridiculous and presumptuous. Her laughter was cruel, humiliating, and designed to make me feel foolish for believing that my romantic efforts might have created an opportunity for us to connect as husband and wife. The impact of Elena's mockery was immediate and devastating. I felt a combination of shock, humiliation, and profound hurt that went beyond simple rejection into something that felt like deliberate cruelty. Elena hadn't just declined my advance. She had ridiculed me for making it, treating my desire for intimacy with my own wife as something laughable and inappropriate. In that moment, I realized that Elena didn't just lack interest in physical intimacy with me. She had developed contempt for my efforts to maintain our relationship and my apparent neediness in wanting to connect with her physically and emotionally. Her laughter revealed that she viewed my romantic gestures and desire for closeness as pathetic rather than loving, annoying rather than appreciated. I sat on the couch next to Elena for several minutes after her response, trying to process what had just happened and what it revealed about the state of our marriage. The woman I had married, the person I had committed to love and honor for the rest of my life, had just laughed at me for wanting to be intimate with her. The humiliation was so complete and unexpected that I struggled to formulate any response at all. Elena seemed to realize immediately that her reaction had been hurtful, but instead of apologizing or attempting to repair the damage she had caused, she simply returned her attention to her phone as if nothing significant had occurred. Her casual dismissal of my humiliation was almost as devastating as her initial mockery, suggesting that she either didn't understand or didn't care about the impact her words had on me. That night, I lay awake for hours thinking about what Elena's action had revealed about our relationship and what it meant for our future together. I realized that the physical intimacy problems we had been experiencing weren't just about timing or stress. They were about Elena's fundamental lack of respect for me as her husband and partner. Elena had shown me that she not only didn't desire me physically, but that she found my desire for her ridiculous and contemptible. Someone who truly loved and respected their spouse wouldn't mock them for wanting intimacy, even if they weren't in the mood for physical connection themselves. Elena's response had revealed a level of disrespect and contempt that made me question everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Over the following days and weeks, I found myself emotionally withdrawing from Elena and our relationship in ways that felt both protective and inevitable. I had tried for months to bridge the growing gap between us through increased effort and romantic gestures, but Elena had shown me that my efforts were not just unappreciated, but actively despised. I stopped trying to initiate physical intimacy with Elena, understanding finally that her rejections weren't about timing or mood, but about her fundamental lack of attraction to and respect for me. I stopped planning romantic evenings or special gestures, recognizing that Elena never appreciated these efforts. I stopped trying to engage Elena in meaningful conversations about our relationship or future, realizing that she had already decided these topics weren't worth her time or attention. Instead, I began staying later at work, handling projects and responsibilities that justified avoiding home until late in the night. I started eating dinner alone more frequently, either at work or after Elena had already finished her meal and moved on to other activities. I also began sleeping in the guest room more regularly, initially claiming that I was staying up late to work on projects, but eventually just acknowledging that Elena and I had developed different sleep schedules and preferences. Elena didn't seem to object to these changes in our routine, apparently preferring to have the bedroom to herself and the freedom to stay up late on her phone without my presence or questions. During this period of emotional withdrawal, I also began quietly gathering information about divorce procedures and legal requirements, though I wasn't yet ready to take concrete steps toward ending our marriage. I consulted with a family law attorney recommended by a colleague to understand what divorce would look like financially and logistically, given our shared assets and relatively straightforward marital situation. The lawyer explained that because Elena and I had no children and relatively simple financial arrangements, our divorce could be completed efficiently if we could reach an agreement on asset division and other practical matters. He also advised me to begin documenting Elena's behavior and our deteriorating relationship, creating a record that might be useful if our divorce became contentious or if Elena tried to claim that I had abandoned our marriage without cause. Following the lawyer's advice, I began keeping records of Elena's general disengagement from our relationship. I saved text messages that showed her priorities and interests, documented her social activities, and the time and energy she invested in relationships outside our marriage, and created a timeline of our declining relationship that might help explain my eventual decision to seek divorce. This process of documentation was emotionally difficult, but also clarifying, forcing me to acknowledge patterns in Elena's behavior that I had been rationalizing or minimizing for months. Seeing our relationship problems written down in chronological order made it impossible to continue hoping that Elena's distance and disrespect were temporary phases that would resolve themselves with time and patience. Elena began to notice my total withdrawal after several weeks of changed behavior on my part, but her initial reaction was annoyance rather than concern. She would make comments about me being distant or moody, apparently expecting me to return to my previous pattern of pursuing her attention and trying to repair whatever was wrong between us. When Elena complained about my lack of engagement with her and our relationship, I found myself feeling detached from her concerns and unmotivated to explain what was driving my changed behavior. I saw no point in trying to discuss my feelings or our problems with someone who had demonstrated such complete disrespect for my perspective. The final confrontation between Elena and me occurred on a Sunday evening in early December, about 2 months after the incident that had fundamentally changed my understanding of our marriage. Elena had been complaining throughout the day about my emotional distance and lack of attention to our relationship, apparently expecting me to respond with the kind of reassurance and renewed effort that I had provided during previous rough patches in our marriage. But instead of apologizing for my withdrawal or promising to try harder to meet Elena's expectations, I looked at her calmly and told her that I wanted a divorce. The words came out more easily than I had expected, without anger or dramatic emotion, simply as a statement of fact about what I had decided needed to happen. Elena's reaction was immediate shock, followed by a complete emotional breakdown. The woman who had laughed mockingly at my desire for intimacy just 2 months earlier was suddenly asking me not to end our marriage. Elena claimed that she hadn't meant to hurt me with her laughter, pulling out excuses, and that we could fix our problems if I was willing to work with her. The contrast between Elena's cruel mockery when I had wanted closeness and her pleading when I wanted freedom was stark and revealing. Elena's pleas seemed genuine, but I found myself unable to feel moved by her distress. Someone who truly loved and respected their spouse wouldn't mock them for wanting intimacy, and someone who had developed genuine feelings of remorse wouldn't have needed the threat of divorce to recognize that their behavior had been hurtful and unacceptable. I told Elena that I had given my best effort to our marriage for years, but that her attitude had shown me that she had no respect for me as her husband. I explained that I couldn't continue living in a marriage where my dignity and self-worth were constantly under attack, and that her recent show of concern couldn't undo months of dismissive and contemptuous treatment. Elena continued pleading and promising that she would change her behavior and treat me with more respect and appreciation. She suggested couples counseling, romantic getaways, and various other interventions that might help us rebuild our relationship and restore the love and intimacy that had been missing from our marriage. But I had already moved beyond the point where counseling or renewed efforts could repair the damage that had been done to our relationship. Elena's behavior hadn't just hurt my feelings. It had revealed fundamental aspects of her character and her feelings toward me that made me understand we were incompatible in ways that couldn't be fixed through better communication or renewed commitment. I remained calm and simply repeated that I had made my decision and that we would need to work with attorneys to handle the practical aspects of ending our marriage. Over the following weeks, Elena continued trying to convince me to reconsider my decision about divorce, but I had already begun the legal process and was emotionally committed to moving forward with ending our marriage. Elena's efforts to save our relationship included everything from emotional appeals to threats about what divorce would cost us financially and socially. But none of Elena's attempts at reconciliation could address the fundamental problem that had led to my decision to seek divorce. I had lost respect for Elena as a partner and companion, and she had demonstrated that she had no respect for me as her husband. Without mutual respect, we had no foundation for rebuilding our relationship, regardless of whatever other feelings or practical considerations might argue for staying together. The divorce proceedings took over 8 months to complete, during which Elena and I lived separately and communicated primarily through our attorneys. Elena continued hoping that I would change my mind about ending our marriage, but I used the time apart to confirm that I felt better and more at peace without her presence in my daily life. Elena's final attempts to reconcile included messages explaining her perspective on our relationship problems and her regret about the way she had treated me during our final years together. She acknowledged that she had been disrespectful and dismissive, and she promised that she had learned from the experience and would treat me better if I was willing to give her another chance. But reading Elena's messages only confirmed that she still didn't understand what had gone wrong in our marriage or what her mockery had revealed about her feelings toward me. Elena seemed to believe that our problems had been about communication and effort rather than fundamental incompatibility and lack of respect. When our divorce was finalized, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief that surprised me with its intensity. I was sad about the failure of a relationship I had entered with genuine love and optimism, but I was relieved to be free from the constant humiliation and emotional neglect that had characterized our final years together. The experience taught me that disrespect can destroy a marriage more quickly and completely than infidelity or most other relationship problems. Elena's mockery and dismissal of my emotional and physical needs had been just as devastating to our relationship as any affair might have been. I learned that love without respect is an insufficient foundation for a successful marriage, and that someone who can laugh at your vulnerability and need for connection is not someone who can be trusted with your heart or your future. Elena's cruel laughter had revealed aspects of her character that I had been unwilling to see earlier in our relationship. Most importantly, I discovered that self-respect sometimes requires walking away from people and situations that consistently make you feel diminished and unworthy. Elena's mockery had forced me to choose between preserving my marriage and preserving my dignity, and choosing dignity had ultimately led to a much happier and more fulfilling life. The months following our divorce allowed me to rediscover parts of myself that had been suppressed during my marriage to Elena. Without the constant stress of trying to earn affection and respect from someone who was fundamentally unwilling to provide them. Looking back now, I realized that Elena's cruel behavior was actually a gift, though it didn't feel that way at the time. Her mockery had finally shown me the truth about our relationship and had given me the clarity I needed to choose self-respect over false hope. Sometimes the end of love comes not from betrayal or deception, but from the simple recognition that the person you married doesn't respect you enough to treat your heart with care. Elena's laughter had taught me that once someone mocks your vulnerability and need for connection, they have forfeited the right to your continued efforts and emotional investment. The woman who found my desire ridiculous had no right to cry when I decided to take that desire elsewhere.